On my left, your right, is Professor John Horack, who serves as the Neil Armstrong Chair in Aerospace Policy here at the Ohio State University. He's jointly appointed in the John Glenn College of Public Affairs and in the College of Engineering. And that reflects his background. He's trained as a scientist and had a career in NASA as a mission specialist, helping to run some of the programs there, but then migrated out into the world of the private sector, also the nonprofit sector, involved in space exploration from a variety of different roles. All the while putting his technical background to work, marrying it with a knowledge of the public policy making process. So John is a wonderful example of the interdisciplinary work that goes on here at Ohio State University and at the Glenn College. We're proud to be at that intersection of public policy and science. On my right, your left, is Major General Charles Bolden, a Marine aviator, over 3 decades in the Marines, then went on to pilot the space shuttle 4 times, once as commander of the space shuttle, and then eventually became the administrator of NASA under President Obama. At the end of Obama's term, he stepped down. So you have 2 people who've had exemplary careers in science, exploration, and leadership. And the last thing I'll say about Major General Bolden before I turn this over, particularly as I'm here partnering with our good friends from WOSU, he's a huge public radio fan. And yes. I know that because if you've ever listened to Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, he had a star turn on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and I think he got all 3 questions right.
I had a lot of help. But I watched the audience.
He's a big fan of public radio and public television. So with that, please join me in welcoming our 2 guests and look forward to a lively discussion.
Pleasure to welcome to our dialogue series the 12th Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, 4-time shuttle flyer, retired Major General from the United States Marine Corps, Charlie Bolden. May I call you Charlie?
Please do, John.
It's
good. Great.
Yes, call me John because that's what my mom wanted me to be called.
I know.
So I assume that's why I have my name. So welcome. We're going to open it up for some questions as we move forward tonight, but we're at a really interesting time in space exploration, and this is a kind of a transition or an inflection point here in the United States. I mean, the shuttle has been retired. It's now 8 years. Mm-hmm. It's our longest gap since we've sent humans into space from America, from American soil on American vehicles. And yet at the same time, might you argue that it's a golden age of space exploration in some other ways too?
You wouldn't argue the point.
Okay.
I would state the point.
Okay, we're
that it's the golden age.
Okay.
And I'm going to take just a point of privilege. I want to call out a friend of mine in the back, Marty Kress, who is one of my. We talked about mentors earlier today with some of the students, and Marty is sort of a mentor of mine. When I went to NASA headquarters for a year after my 3rd flight and before my final flight, I went there, and that's when I met Marty, and he kind of guided me through the ins and outs of Washington, D.C., and I managed to escape before he could get away. So it's good to see him here. Thanks, Marty. But it is, I call it the golden age, and I try not to get angry at a lot of things, but I get frustrated sometimes as I travel around the U.S. mostly and have listened to people talk about what will be great when America gets back into space again, or it'll be great when the U.S. has a human space flight program again and everything, and I go, where are they living? You know, under what log or whatever it is, because the work that we've done since 2011, when we retired shuttle on the International Space Station, is second to none. You know, we don't fly as many people into space because the vehicle that we fly on today carries 3 at a time as opposed to 7. But the work that we do has expanded. When NASA brought on a private company called CASIS, the Center for Advancement of Science in Space, who could go out and contract with people the way that NASA could not do, and they understood the private sector the way that we in NASA did not do. We opened up space to the science world, in a way that I don't think any of us had ever imagined. And so the advancements in science today greatly exceed what we were doing during the shuttle era. And because I'm a pilot, I have to remind everybody there's a big A in NASA, and it's aeronautics. And I'm incredibly proud of aeronautics because in 2014, when we put out a new strategic plan for aeronautics, we started moving into green aviation. None of you fly on airplanes today that don't have NASA technology. If anybody's ever been on a Boeing 787 or the newer 737s, the mood lighting, you know, that good stuff that makes you feel really comfortable. And on the 787, when you get off and you're not tired because you're getting more oxygen and all that, that's a result of joint collaboration between NASA and the aviation industry. So it's a great period of time.
When I started at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in 1987, we would have the shuttle astronauts come back, and they would have these patches on their blue suits, and it would have a big 25 and a swoosh, right? And that was a cool patch, I have to say. That, you know, I wish I had had the chance to earn one, but it meant that you had gone 25 times the speed of sound, Mach 25. You had touched and visited a place that almost nobody has ever gone. And I noticed something happen over time. The 25 got replaced with a 100. And that 100 was not that you went Mach 100. No, it's that you lived 100 days in space. And now I guess the patch is 365.
For Scott Kelly.
For Scott Kelly.
And Mikhail Kornienko.
And my friend Jen Norris is here, and she's in elementary school. She has not lived in a time when a human being has not been in space and an American has not been in space. This is real progress.
Jen will wear the 3-year patch because her first venture into space will very likely be to Mars. And so unless we get a lot more advanced propulsion systems, it's still going to take Jen 8 months to get there and a year on the planet and 8 months to come back. So she'll be wearing a 3-year patch.
So you're excited about the future, obviously. Thanks, Jen, for volunteering to go to Mars. But we've visited every planet in the solar system. We saw New Horizons pass by Ultima Thule. And now space is something that isn't just the United States and the former Soviet Union and Russia. It's now something that almost every nation can in some way have a space program.
Exactly.
And I know you did a lot of work with a program at NASA called Servir, where you would travel to a place like Nepal. And you think, Nepal, what? Do they have a space program? Or do they launch out of the Himalayas because it's high up, closer to space? But you can really build value for your citizens from space in many ways without having rockets and astronauts.
Exactly, and I was excited to learn about a fledgling observatory here at the Ohio State University at the Glenn College, where we're going to actually hope you all, I say we, I'm always talking about we, taking credit for what other people do, but hopefully we'll have I call it an observatory, but an instrument on the International Space Station within the next few years that will be giving us information about our planet that can help people with water resources management, crop development, you name it, because the program Servir, which is my favorite program of all the programs at NASA, believe it or not, is located in 4 different places around the world: Kathmandu, Nepal, Nairobi, Kenya, Bangkok, Thailand, and the last one that we opened before I left, we work cooperatively with the U.S. Agency for International Development. They really fund the program. But the last one was opened in a place that many of you have never heard of called Niamey, Niger. And if you don't know anything about Africa, Niger is perhaps the poorest country on the continent, most illiterate. And when the U.S. decided that they were going to put this center in this country, the Prime Minister and the President were just beside themselves. They literally wept at the opening ceremony, the dedication ceremony, because they saw that as a way to get their young people interested in education and perhaps a way out of the depravity and everything that they have today. So as we were talking with some of the students today, it is amazing what space and exploration and science are able to do for people around the world.
And this is not something new, right? I mean, I think that I will admit I was late to the game. Being a gamma ray astronomer, I had to lift my telescopes above the atmosphere to look out And I didn't realize, well, why would anybody want to look back? But the Apollo 8 picture that we took during the Christmas holiday of 1968, to see that Earth moving above the horizon of the moon as the 3 astronauts came over. We were talking today about a letter that Ernst Stuhlinger had written to a Catholic nun in Africa, where he described that the most important advancement of all the things we will do in space is probably the artificial satellite, very 1970s term. Looking back at the Earth is one way in which not only are we creating great social, economic, educational, and quality of life outcomes for people everywhere, it's also turning into a commercial opportunity as well as we expand the marketplace out into low Earth orbit. Exactly.
And one of the things I'm trying to do now in my second, third, fourth life, whatever it is actually becoming John will tell you, I was the healthy skeptic when I first became the NASA administrator. And there were people in the Obama administration with me who I call commercial ideologues, who really believe that if we just took all the money from NASA and gave it to the commercial sector, all of a sudden everything would start happening magically. You know, we'd be able to get to space quicker, we'd be able to do all kinds of things, and I didn't believe that, and I still don't believe you can do it that simply, but I've become a huge champion of commercial space now, because when we made the very difficult decision to go through with the directive actually to phase out of the shuttle program in 2011, we were really counting on commercial entities, commercial and entrepreneurial entities stepping in to replace shuttle. And it's taken us time. It's taken us a lot more time than we wanted to, but we now have reliable ways to get cargo into space, not just to the International Space Station, but to get other things into orbit. And this year, you're going to see Boeing and SpaceX launch for the first time each of them, a commercial spacecraft built for human space flight. And then before the year is out, if all goes well, that's those same vehicles, having come back from their first non-crewed flights, will put crews on board, and they'll go and they will become the first crews on the International Space Station who were transported there by commercial means and not some government. And I think that's going to be an incredible day. For people who thought we were not involved in human spaceflight, they'll flock to the Cape because they want to see the coming again, the rebirth of human spaceflight.
Do you think all the old Volkswagen vans will be there with all of our clothes from the 60s
as well? Days,
it'll be a little different, right?
It'll be a little bit different.
But if you look at it, I mean, let's count the number of new spaceflight systems that have been or have been developed. Of course, there's NASA is developing the Space Launch System. We'll talk about getting beyond low Earth orbit in a little bit, but that's the biggest rocket ever to be developed, and it'll be the heaviest device ever to fly. We have developed an opportunity to cargo supply the space station with cargo through the Antares vehicle, which is an orbital sciences activity, the Falcon 9. We have the Sierra Nevada Dream Chaser coming on board. We're developing a large amount of what I'd call differential redundancy in our ability to get to space. Can you talk a little bit about why that's so important to have these multiple modes at one time?
It's great. May be able to have too much. I'm not sure we're anywhere close to that.
Too much space? Can we have
but
too much space?
If we ever needed an example of the importance of redundancy in multiple systems, it was shortly after we began flying commercial cargo to the International Space Station. Our two providers here in America were back then Orbital ATK, used to be Orbital Sciences, and they're now Northrop Grumman, and SpaceX. And much to our dismay, Orbital launched one night from Wallops, the eastern shore of Maryland, and the rocket didn't even clear the pad and just disintegrated, and all the cargo that was going to the International Space Station with it. Several weeks later, we launched a SpaceX space cargo craft. It got off the pad, started on its way to orbit, and then went out of control, and we lost that. So we're down two, and then another few weeks, and our old reliable cargo partner, the Russian Progress, went out of control, and we lost that. So there was a period of time that all of the standard ways that we were getting stuff to space were gone. We were saved because the Japanese still had HTV, that they could carry cargo. It's the largest cargo carrier actually in the inventory, and the Europeans still had ATV. So we still had two vehicles that could get cargo to the International Space Station and kind of tide us over until we could figure out what had gone wrong and what had happened. I'll also mention, We are not now, it's no longer Russia and the US and Japan, but it's nations like India. Just this past year, India, through their launch systems, deployed 100 satellites on one launch. So, you know, what technology is allowing us to do in the age of what we call microsatellites or CubeSats, are able to hitch a ride along with a regular normal payload and then get kicked out along the way. So we can now put 100 satellites in space on one launch, and they are able to do things in swarms that we never dreamed of before.
Yeah, the Indian launch vehicle, the PSLV is what it's called. It's among the most reliable launch vehicles on the planet. Now, it doesn't launch people, but if you need a ride to space and you need to be reasonably assured that you're going to get there, that's a vehicle that is open in the commercial market for people to choose from. But it's not just rockets. I mean, you also have, we were talking earlier about the United Arab Emirates having a space program,
Yep.
South Africa having a space program, Australia just now, within the last year and a half or so, announcing a space agency. What's going on in the world? That these
Everybody's
places have
getting
a
the bug,
space agency, right?
and everybody is. There's nothing. I've heard it said once that kids are fascinated by two things: space and dinosaurs. And
those two are correlated, not in a good way for the dinosaurs.
The dinosaurs are gone, and space is the future. Space is not just the present for young people, but it is the future. And every nation, almost every nation in the world, wants to be a member of the family of spacefaring nations. And one of the things that I was really proud to do as a part of the Obama administration was take President Obama's directive to expand the number of what we call non-traditional partners. So find as many nations in the world as we could that wanted to become members of the family of spacefaring nations, but didn't otherwise have either the financial ability to do it or the technological capability. So we started with something very rudimentary: STEM education. Every nation in the world has a need for increasing interest in education among their young people. So that was a magic first for us, whether we went to Africa or the Middle East or anywhere, because everybody was interested in STEM education. And then some grow from that. When we first started with the UAE, they were, depending on other people. They had sent a team of engineers to Korea who lived there for 10 years to study how you build rockets. And they're on the verge now, in the end of 2020, of launching their own mission to Mars, which will be a Mars atmospheric observer called HOPE, to arrive on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the founding of the UAE. A lot of good things about it. And I was talking with some of the students today, some of the attendant benefits you get from it. In a country that is not highly noted for its human rights prowess, they are doing very well in integrating women into their scientific community. About 51% of the graduates from engineering schools today are women. Jordan, about 51% of the graduates from engineering schools are women. One of the program managers, the deputy program manager for the HOPE mission in UAE, is a woman who happens to be the Minister of State for Advanced Science. And her complaint is she lacks diversity on her team, on her project team, because about 80% of the team are women, because they can't get Emirati men interested enough in science and engineering to fill out the team. So she's trying to figure out, how does she bring about diversity on her team to benefit her nation? So interesting times in the world.
So this is a way in which I think that almost every person on Earth can directly benefit from what we do in space, and almost provide them an opportunity to, in a different way perhaps than you have had, but to experience this overview effect of what it's like to go to space and look back at our planet or look back at ourselves and see us in a very different way. I know that was a really emotional experience.
Quite emotional for me. I was technically prepared beyond belief. I found that there was nothing. My very first space shuttle mission, I flew in 1986, and I'd been in the program since 1980. We didn't fly until 82. So I went there, with the expectation of beginning to fly in the space shuttle, and what was supposed to happen in 78, 82, we finally flew. And it was an incredible time as we watched the program get better and better and better. and flew my first flight in January of 1986. And 10 days after I came back, you couldn't have been more excited and everything. I, along with the rest of the world, watched my friends launch in Challenger and not come back. You know, they got 73 seconds into flight and then everything was gone, just in an instant, in the twinkling of an eye. So it reminded us of, you know, this is risky business we do, and we had to make the decision, is it worth it? Is the risk worth it? And I think everybody who decides to venture off into space has made the conscious decision that, boy, this is really worth it. You know, it's not only is it fun and exciting, but it's something that's an absolute imperative for humanity, because it's just in our DNA to explore, and so that's why we keep going.
Yeah, it's really built the world that we're in. I know many of you probably used GPS navigation, maybe not to get here tonight, but you've used it before, right? And you know this guy, Albert Einstein, right, who at the beginning of the previous century was riding on a train in Germany, sits there, and he's receding out of the station, and he sees the clock going click, 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 and he comes up with an idea. And it turns out that that idea is required for you to be able to navigate with your GPS. There is something called a relativistic correction that gets put into a GPS signal so that you can land an airplane or find your way to, you know, Kroger or whatever it happens to be, so you can, you know, take your Instagram picture of this activity and post it on #CharlieBolden, whatever it is. That's one thing. So relativity, this, you think, well, it's this esoteric thing of, you know, crazy guy with big hair and a chalkboard. It's in your pocket, right? And space exploration has directly driven that. Also, in GPS, you correct with the ionospheric correction, and you've had the ability to see the aurora and the ionosphere from above, because those signals have to go through the ionosphere to get to your phone or your device. That also has to be corrected, and so that you don't land your airplane, you know, 600 yards to the right of the runway. That's not a good day. So space has really transformed in ways that I don't think we always appreciate just what our daily lives are like, exactly. Right? And of course, we're 50 years now from perhaps one of the greatest space explorations, that is the first Apollo landing. And now we're talking about going back to the moon.
Yep.
China's gone there and landed on the backside. Next month, Israel will launch a privately funded robotic lander. What's going on?
Well, again, I go back to the fact that nations of the world and private entities, entrepreneurs and the like, all want to, they have this desire to be a part of the advancement of humanity. And some have a very strong desire for what they think is a potential financial gold mine. Whether you talk about, you know, there is the nation of Luxembourg, for example, is pinning their hopes on mining. Whether it's mining of the moon or mining of asteroids. So you've got nations around the world and people who live in those countries, entrepreneurs, who have all kinds of interest in things that they think will advance society and also bring some financial gain. So.
Of course, we're here in Ohio, and I'm always amazed. You know, back when my children were little, they would collect the State Quarters series, right? And one would come out and you're like, what's on the back of that one? And it's interesting, you look at Ohio, there's an outline of the state, and there's the Wright brothers flyer, and there's a moonwalking astronaut, assuming it's Neil probably, right? We have a bright past, and I think we also have a bright future here in Ohio. I know we've got the service module for the Orion spacecraft coming to Ohio. Can you talk about some of the things that you think uniquely we can build here?
You talk about things, we were talking about what I call the observatory again, that we hope will be operated out of here at Ohio State and will be built here. You go over to Cleveland and you're talking about the Glenn Research Center, which is the world's foremost research center when it comes to propulsion, to small engines and propulsion and icing and all other kinds of things. So the state of Ohio is a big leader.
Yeah, and that other A in NASA is important.
Aeronautics is critical.
Ohio is the #1 supplier to both Airbus and Boeing. We know how to build things here. And so, GE engines, we have Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I think we have a very, very bright future in terms of our ability to contribute to what's about to happen. We'll segue into some questions, and if you do have a question you'd like to ask, we would just ask you to please come to the microphone, which is on your right and my left, We'll line up there, say who you are so we know kind of your name and we can say, oh, hi.
And a reminder, there are no dumb questions, because if there is a question that one of you is thinking of, I can guarantee that somebody else in this audience is thinking about the same thing and they don't have the courage to get up because they think it's a dumb question. So go ahead and ask your question.
Right.
I'm the dumb question asker.
As we go forward, of course, where humans go, legal and policy regulations follow.
Yep.
And I know you loved some of your time in Washington, D.C., working with Congress and committees and testifying and laws and budgets and where's, how much money have you costed and committed and allocated and schedule and all these kinds of things. If we're going to the moon and we're going to commercialize opportunities in low Earth orbit and space, what do you think we're going to have to do on the legal and policy framework side so that it's not just the Wild West?
Oh, they're already, I mentioned mining before. That's one of the things that is sort of it has potential to be the Wild Wild West. Marty was around when we launched 2 satellites on one shuttle mission. Both failed in an identical way. After having the first one fail, the team talked about it. They talked about it to the owners and said, well, we think we understand what went wrong. We're certain it won't happen a second time. And so several days later, we spun it up and lifted it off, and it got out where the solid rocket was supposed to fire, and exactly the same thing happened. So we had 2 worthless satellites, useless satellites in a useless orbit. It took NASA some time to work with people, but we came up with a way to go get those satellites, bring them back to Earth. But that actually began the serious conversation on what we call today space law. Because there was no, who owns the satellites once they're retrieved? There was no law about that. And so we were going to resort to salvage law, maritime salvage law, which said that the captain of the ship, it's his or hers. And folk over in Lloyd's of London kind of watched us for a while and, allowed us to toy around with this. And then they came in with their lawyers and they said, oh, here's one point. We own it. We paid the premium. It's ours. So I don't care who goes and gets it. It's ours. And that settled the case. But, I could imagine going through a huge, if it had not been Lloyd's of London working with NASA, I can imagine a many years long legal battle about who was going to own these satellites. So one of the fastest growing fields of law today is space law. Trying to understand, how do we, who can operate on an asteroid when we start landing things and people on asteroids, and who has the right to bring something back? The U.S. Congress passed a law 2 years ago that said anybody that goes to a foreign body and takes something that belongs to them, outright. Other nations in the world said, we're not sure that we agree with that. And so, we've got the UN working, we've got a lot of other people working, so regulations will follow. Stand by.
It's one of the things, as was mentioned, I think, in the introduction when we introduced the crowd here, this opportunity to work between engineering and public policy, between the technical side of something that is what we barely know how to do. Humans barely know how to put people in space. We do everything we can, but it's really hard. And the other thing that's really hard to do sometimes is getting along with other people, right? Especially when your interests and my interests collide. So we put those 2 very different categories of really challenging problems on the table together, and you wind up with a conversation like NASA and Lloyd's of London walked into a bar. And that sounds like a joke, right? But this is where the future, in my opinion, this is where I think the future is going. And so, space policy is not tax policy, and it's not necessarily environmental policy, and it's not, it's its own thing. And we need all the bright minds. Space is one of these endeavors where everybody with any kind of capability to do almost any skill, accountant, machinist, thermodynamicist, pilot, legal, there's a place for you in the space agency and in the space programs of the commercial companies that are coming along. So I encourage you, think about space as a career, and if you have any questions, you can ask Jen, right? She's got it all settled. Let's go to our audience. Please state your name and a little bit about yourself, and we'll be happy to entertain your question.
Hey. Hello, my name is Victoria Wegman. I am a senior here at Ohio State studying communication. I've had the pleasure of working on communication teams both at NASA headquarters and at Langley Research Center. I will be returning after graduation this May to Langley Research Center to be on communication team there. One question that I get a lot is one question that I have for myself, and I would like your opinion on it. Why are we using the SLS when we can use the Atlas or Falcon 9 among other cheaper rocks?
For those of you who don't know what SLS is, it's Space Launch System, as John talked about earlier. When it's finished, it'll be the largest rocket we've ever built. And SLS was primarily built for deep space travel, and it has a capability that when we started looking at the capability we really were looking at getting things to Mars. And what do you need? How many Atlas Vs would it take to get a human mission to Mars? And how many Falcon 9s would it take to do something, or how many Falcon Heavies? And when we did the analysis, we kind of patterned a rocket that was sized out to be like the SLS, the Space Launch System. And it's actually a family of launch vehicles, because as we get farther and farther down the road and we want to carry more and more payload, then we'll enhance it with a different upper stage and some other kind of things. And let me give you a quick example of what the SLS will allow us to do, and it has nothing to do with humans. If we want to do a mission to Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, and it's a big deal in the science community.
There's more water on Europa than there is on the Earth.
You either take a number of years, like I think it's 7 or 8, to get to Europa, which is orbiting Jupiter, or SLS gives you the lift, the power to cut that in half. So to a scientist who's a principal investigator on a mission, it means they may live to actually conduct their mission on the planet where they're going. I mean, but that's the biggest reason for SLS. A lot of times people will tell you, well, it won't last forever, and they're absolutely right. Nothing lasts forever. We are getting ready to retire, which was an incredible rocket, built by ULA, which used to be Boeing, and two separate companies, Boeing and Lockheed. But as technology comes along, things go away. There's a system called VASIMR. We may fly VASIMR. It may be another version of an ion engine. Whenever we have an operating ion engine or plasma fusion rocket engine, SLS and everything's going by the way, because it's going to mean we can now go to Mars in a matter of days, if at least half the time that it takes us today with chemical rockets. Chemical rockets are going to be obsolete one of these days. We want them to be obsolete because we want to be able to go faster and go farther. So kind of a long answer to your short question.
But thank you for the question. Appreciate it.
But you mentioned your first thing was why. And I'm on the why kick while I'm here, because in talking to students, I emphasize to them, as they make their decisions about what they want to do after they finish here at The Ohio State University, ask themselves, first of all, why do I want to do what it is I want to do? And I think if you answer the question appropriately, you'll find out, because I'm passionate about that. And if you follow your passion, you can't go wrong. You may not get rich, but you'll be the richest person in the world. My wife and I spent 34 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, and I can remember we'd come home from some occasion sometime or some travel somewhere, and she would look at me, she'd say, we're the richest poor people in the world. Because she recognized the fact that riches are not always money, not always financial. They're opportunities to do things. And coming out of this university, if your why is right, you're going to be one of the richest people in the world, and you will never work a day in your life, because you'll enjoy every single moment of it, and that's not work. Yeah.
Thank you. Next. Yeah.
Hi again, Mr. Bolden, Dr. Horack. My name is Ilya Gulko. I'm a first-year master's student at OSU studying aerospace engineering. And my question is kind of broad. In the past, the government agencies, NASA, used to coordinate the SpaceX as it was almost a monopoly, and it was the sole pace setter of how we explore space. Mm-hmm. But now with the developments in the private sector like SpaceX, Blue Origin, access to space has become much broader. And my question is, how do you see the role of the government agencies and the private sector in the space? Is it competitive? Is it complementary?
I think it's definitely not competitive. There is really strong competition. It is not among nations, it's among companies. Some of the strongest competition today is Blue Origin versus SpaceX versus Boeing. And then you add in Sierra Nevada, you name it. The competition today is in the business sector, not in the international sector. Internationally, what we try to do is we coined a phrase that's called comparation or collaboration.
Collaboration, yeah.
And it's where you compete for ideas. And when the space agencies come together, when I was a NASA administrator, we would try to get the heads of agency together periodically, and we would talk about where do we want to go next, or what do we want to do. So we had a competition of ideas, and then when you finally make a decision on what we're going to do together, then you go off and do that. But you want to make sure that you know why you're doing what you're doing, and then what you're going to do. So I think it's essential that we collaborate with the private sector and we collaborate with international partners. You will see NASA make an announcement here pretty soon that says, yeah, we're going back to the moon and we're going to put humans back on the surface of the moon. And much to my pleasant surprise, they're going to really call on industry and international partners to develop landers so that NASA, the federal government, the US government, doesn't have to make the investment. We've got an SLS. We've got the launch vehicle that can take anything. In my conversations with all of our partners, I would always tell them, don't waste your money and your time trying to develop a heavy lift launch vehicle to compete with the US. We aren't building a lander. We need a lander. So you build a lander, I can get you where you want to go. The only thing I ask in return is one seat for one American astronaut, so that when we land on Mars, we've got an American and an Israeli and an Arab and a Russian and a you name it. But I think that's where we want the future to be.
Do you think NASA will still determine the main goal? Will it still be the pace setter?
You know, let me tell you where we are today, and I know where we have been for the last almost 8 years. NASA was not the determining factor. It was always there. I'll refer you to something called the Global Exploration Roadmap. People in the business call it the GER, and you can Google it. And we are on version 3 now, I think. But it's a compilation of it's the compilation of the ideas, the discussion that up to 25 nations have been having over the last 15 years about the direction for human spaceflight. And so again, while NASA, every organization has to have a leader, every group. NASA is sort of the natural leader because everybody looks to the US. And so when I went to a meeting, because I was the NASA administrator, I was the acknowledged leader of the group, whether I wanted to be or not, because everybody looks to NASA. But the outcome from that group was always one that was jointly discussed and jointly decided. So if you look at the Global Exploration Roadmap, you'll see how we get to Mars based on the discussion among 25 different nations, many of whom have no way to contribute anything to get there except a desire to participate.
But I think the world is in a position where NASA will, in my opinion, always have sort of a lead voice in the chorus of who's going to space. In our conversations, for example, with Jan Werner, who runs the European Space Agency, they're looking to say, okay, let's discuss where does the United States think they're going, how do we align, because the last thing people want to do is to cross dollars or budgets or purposes, because there just isn't enough resource to go around. The problem is hard enough. So I think NASA will always have a lead role, but as I think Charlie would say, the NASA administrator is not a boundary-free condition, right? You have, even as NASA administrator, you have some bosses that are telling the agency what to do. And so the vision, NASA's vision, it really doesn't come out of the agency itself all the time.
I was asked a question earlier today, and not exactly related to what you said, but why didn't the United States land a lander on the backside of the moon before the Chinese? Why didn't we do that? If we have the capability of doing it, why didn't we do it? And it's because in the US, NASA is guided by lots of entities, Congress, the American public, the president, and the administration. Most importantly, though, in the field of science is by the scientific community through a process called the decadal surveys. So every 10 years, learned people from all over the world come together and they meet and they give NASA, they give the world something that's called a decadal survey in earth science, a decadal survey in planetary science, and they list in order the top 10 or so things that they think the world scientific community ought to be undertaking. And what they mean is, this is what you ought to put your money on, NASA. And let me tell you, it is hard. It is really hard for NASA to ignore the scientific community and say, yeah, we like those ideas, but we like number 4. And so we're going to go do, you are now tangling with one of the toughest organizations in the world, the scientific community. So it just, a mission to the backside of the moon just never ranked very high on the planetary science list of things to be done. In a country like China, doesn't have a planet, a decadal survey. So they say, okay, we're going to go do it, and we do it.
They have a 5-year plan, right?
5-year plan, and they follow it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next. Appreciate your question.
Hello, my name is Max Chin. I'm now an engineer at the NASA Glenn Research Center. So I'm happy to see you again. I've seen you speak a few times. My question is in regards to changes in policy. Under George W. Bush, we had the Constellation program for going back to the moon. Then under Obama, we were going to Mars. Now under the current administration, we're talking about going back to the moon.
Yeah.
I'd like to get your insight as the former administrator on how much of that is a change in policy, how much of it is due to technological limitations, and what might be different this time where we might actually see some success and forward motion.
And for this, I'm going to ask both John and Marty to either shake their heads yes or no, that's not right. Because we've all lived it. And I happen to believe, the reason I refer you to the GER, to the Global Exploration Roadmap, or to NASA, the world, the space world's present, it's a funky looking thing that has Earth, Moon, Mars. That has been the vision for space exploration since President Eisenhower. Before we even landed on the moon, Wernher von Braun had published a vision for humans to Mars. So Mars as the ultimate destination for some reason, humanity has always held Mars as the place we want to go. Not as our final stop, but as the horizon destination, and it's just how you get there. So I don't think that the destinations are policy changes. There's subtle changes in the road, the path that we're going to take to get somewhere. And I am very pleasantly surprised, and I was really worried when the Trump administration came in, and because this will seem partisan, and it is. So I'll just admit it.
You're now entitled to your
Yeah, I'm
opinion.
entitled to do it because I can.
Right.
If it had Obama on it, it was going. That was policy. Unwritten, but policy. And so I figured, okay, Mars is out of here. Mars is going. And so that's exactly what appeared to happen until you read between the lines. And what we're doing now is we're going to put emphasis on trying to get humans back to the moon, because there are people who believe going back to the moon makes it a lot easier to get to Mars. I don't happen to be one of them. So, I could ask people in this room who have any interest in exploration at all, do we have to go to the moon and, do some more stuff in order to get to Mars? They will say yes, definitely. I say absolutely not. And John and I were talking about it earlier today. Somebody asked, what's the difference between landing on the moon and landing on Mars? Absolutely different. The moon has no atmosphere. So you're going to take a rocket and you're going to descend to the surface of the moon. It's going to be a propulsive landing. That's the only way you can slow yourself down. There's no atmosphere to slow you down, to decelerate you, but there's also no atmosphere, no matter how thin, to burn up your spacecraft, and destroy it before you get to the surface. Mars has one of these atmospheres that you love it, but you hate it, because it's not enough of it to slow you down sufficiently, so you got to do a whole mix of things. But there's enough of it to cause all kinds of havoc to your vehicle while it's trying to get through that atmosphere. And so You know, we're looking at, our biggest challenge today used to be radiation. We're comfortable that we don't think people are going to die going to Mars or living on Mars. We're still looking at what the quality of life, long-term quality of life is going to be. Our biggest challenge today is something NASA calls intra-descent and landing. How are we going to get 20, 30 metric tons safely on the surface of Mars, because we today don't know how to do that. That is really, really hard. So that's the challenge of Mars. And you know, spend a little time on the moon if you want to. We can still get to Mars in the 2030s, as long as we don't dedicate ourselves to the moon. If we go back to the moon as a nation, and that's where the money goes, we will never get to Mars. Not in my lifetime, anyway. That's just one person's opinion.
Yeah.
So if I might add
Please.
a quick follow-on, do you view Mars as a science destination and the moon as a commercial destination?
No, I don't. I view both as science. In fact, both are mixed. Both are aspirational destinations for humanity. You know, Mars, the moon is not quite like Sir Edmund Hillary conquering Mount Everest. You know, they asked him one time, why the heck did you do that? And he said, because it's there. Why did the original settlers cross the Mississippi and then cross the Rockies? Because they didn't know what was over there, and they just wanted to go. And we got a good idea of what's on Mars, but we don't know, and so we want to go. We have a good idea of a lot better idea of what's on the moon, but we still want to go there. And so I think both of them are aspirational, both of them are scientific. The moon is much more, if there is a commercial, and I say the big if there is a commercial potential, definitely the moon as opposed to Mars. Mars today is just too far away to make it commercially viable. So you're going there for science or because you want to advance humanity and help in pursuing something that's hard to do.
Yeah. I might recommend a book. The initial part of your question was, you know, moon, Mars, moon, Mars, moon, Mars. And every time a presidential administration comes in, you know, they want my new space policy will. There's a book by Roger Launius called The Myth of Presidential Leadership in Space Flight. That's an excellent book. It's a really interesting discussion about how anomalous Kennedy's speech really was. Because presidents can come in and have a policy, but unless there is support from the Congress and, oh, by the way, money and public support, you know, you might as well shout at the comet. I mean, it may feel good, but it doesn't get anything done. So this idea that a president can come in and declare a new space policy and a new vision is all well and good. But because of Kennedy, it's all ingrained in our brains that somehow then that must happen. And it doesn't. So take a look at that book. I think that'll get another window into sort of why these things don't always play out. Thank you for your question, Max. Appreciate it.
Hi, my name is Andy Miller. I am an astronomy and astrophysics student, so I approach things mostly from the science side. But I'm interested, you've mentioned a couple of times now, you've mentioned space mining a couple of times. And I've thought space mining is maybe a little preposterous, given that it takes us right now $10,000 to launch even a pound into orbit. I think it was famously said of John Glenn that he might as well have been made of solid gold for the amount of money it took to launch him. How do we make space mining economically feasible, or is it even possible to be economically feasible? What do we need to get there?
That's out of my league, but I will, a couple of things we've got to do, and I think we're well on the way to doing it. You've got to get the cost of launch down. You know, SpaceX has served as the leader in whether they're really doing what they say they're doing or not, we don't know yet. But one thing we do know is they're causing everybody else to think they're doing it, and so they're driving the cost down. So the cost per kilogram to go to space is markedly decreased from what it was in the early days of shuttle. So that's the first thing you have to do. Second thing you've got to decide is, okay, what is out there? What are we going to mine? And is its value, is the return on investment such that it makes it worth spending this gold mine worth of stuff to get there to get it? But it's intriguing. NASA actually was never into mining, and they're still not, But we kind of touched on the technology and the procedures to do it back when President Obama had something that was called the Asteroid Redirect Mission. And it was something that came out of trying to facilitate a look into how you potentially save the planet if there's a planet-threatening asteroid heading our way, and we're going to go the way of the dinosaurs. And the vision was you'd get to an asteroid with a robotic spacecraft, and later you could bring humans if you needed to, but the robotic spacecraft, you could use it just to alter the trajectory of the asteroid ever so slightly way far out, and it would cause it to miss Earth. And that was when we said, boy, if we can get there, and you can put a robotic spacecraft that we can dock to, why don't we just send people up and start mining stuff? And so people think it's possible and feasible.
I think you're going to need some, what did Greenspan call it? Irrational exuberance?
Yeah.
Perhaps we're in the irrational exuberance phase. I think to really make a serious business plan, you're not going to go get platinum from an asteroid and bring it back down to the surface of the Earth. Whatever you mine, I think needs to be usable and useful where you are mining it. For me, sounds odd, I'd go mine water, right? Because water is made of hydrogen and oxygen. I can split it and make rocket fuel, I can breathe it, and I can drink it. And those three things seem like they're pretty useful to anyone who wants to survive off the planet. Yeah. So I would go mine water, and I think that's why you see this interest in going to the poles of the moon. The way the moon goes around the sun, the pieces of the moon at the north and south poles are permanently shadowed because these craters, sunlight never penetrates. So a comet hits, carries some water in, it never boils off. You know this as an astronomer, astrophysicist. That's why the poles are useful, because we think and we know there's water there, whether it's in the form of water or ice or OH or what have you. That's what I would go after.
How many of you have heard of in situ resource utilization, ISRU? Okay, this is it's an area that the scientific community, the planetary science community in particular, has been looking at for decades. And one of the things we want to do is, as John said, you want to be able to go to a planet or to an asteroid or something, and then be able to manufacture things while you're there. We do a lot of 3D printing on the International Space Station today. So we're trying to get to the point where we do what's called people refer to massless launch. You take very little material and you manufacture what you need, whether you're going to build a telescope or something else, you manufacture it in place using the resources that are wherever you go.
My crass commercial announcement for the company that manufactures additive manufacturing on the space station, Made in Space, founded in part by an Ohio State.
I was going to say,
Mike Snyder. So thank you for your question, Andy.
Thank you.
We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'd like to be able to get through all of the 5 questions.
We'll try to
that are lined
answer
up.
slower,
We'll try to
faster,
go fast.
shorter.
Next question.
Hi, my name is Tommy Bowles. I'm a third-year student studying public affairs in the Glenn College. I have a kind of a specifically public policy-based question. So this summer, Dr. Horack and I spent a week in Beijing, China, working with the Beijing Institute of Technology, talking about collaboration between the two nations. However, due to the Wolf Amendment passed, I believe in your tenure as administrator at NASA,
Blame me. I did it.
Formal collaboration is not legal between the U.S. and China. So how do you think that serves as a barrier between potential demilitarization in space moving forward, but also do you think there is any chance to repeal that or change it?
I preach patience. When the Wolf Amendment was first put in law in our 2011 appropriations bill, it forbade any bilateral cooperation between NASA and China, period. Just NASA and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. We kept going back to Congressman Wolf, and we got little pieces of relaxation. So today we collaborate in aeronautics, we collaborate in planetary science, mostly lunar science, in geodetics. We have a group that works together on Severe in the Himalayas. The thing we haven't been able to get is human spaceflight. It's coming. This is a presidency, by the way, an administration, by the way. This is an administration that could do a Nixon to China thing. If President Trump said, okay, look, we're gonna let the Chinese come to the International Space Station They already have the international docking standards. It's probably already in their vehicle, so we're going to do it. It would happen like that.
And the Chinese would.
And the
be
Chinese
extraordinarily happy
would jump
to
at
do
it.
that.
So, you know, it's interesting what we can do. It's going to happen.
Okay, thank you very much. Next question, please. Appreciate it. Thanks, Tommy.
Hi, I'm a PhD student in computer science at Ohio State, and my question is to get a big picture of the whole space research and exploration that we have done so far, and moving forward. So, what would be the two most would say be the biggest achievement that we have achieved so far with our space exploration and research? How does we mirror that in our future? What do we hope to
How much
get?
time do we have?
All
All right, I will give you the two most interesting.
Apollo 8
Yeah,
and the photo of Earthrise
I
is
think that's
the
number-
most important thing we've done in all the money we've spent in the space program. It was, I think John will agree with me, it was enabling humanity to see the planet from which we come. And that was what I'm trying to think of who it was, from what ran General Dynamics for a while.
well, the crew of Apollo 8 was Borman, Lovell, Anders. So
It was Bill Anders.
Bill Anders took the photo.
Bill Anders took the photo and called Houston, said, Houston, I think it's Bill, said, I
It's
cannot
Bill
believe
Anders,
it. We have come all the way to the moon to discover our own planet Earth. And I say that was the beginning of the environmental movement, because we recognize the fact that we live on this incredibly, and we call it a fragile ball. Earth isn't fragile. Earth will survive. Earth has survived for billions of years. The dinosaurs went away. We are fragile. And the point that the Apollo 8 mission gave us was it allowed us to see the thin atmosphere, to see that we live on a water planet, and water really controls everything on this planet. And so I think it helps us to understand that we control our own future and destiny. We can squander it and leave Earth here with the roaches, the cockroaches that survive nuclear war and everything else, but no humans. We'll go the way of the dinosaur.
So we'll go with the one as opposed to the two. How about the one? That'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question. Next.
My name's Anthony, and I'm a recent graduate of OSU.
My son would be proud. His first name is Anthony. He doesn't use it very often because he didn't want to be called Tony.
From time to time, I have ideas that bounce around in my head, and one of them was a system that would go around and collect space junk from low Earth orbit. That would be nice to recycle different materials and everything, and to clear off all that space. But with the policy that whoever launched it owns it, kind of, if the system was created and operated by a private company and launched from the U.S. and it went and collected all this junk and it came back, say that there was a piece of unidentifiable space junk and multiple countries thought that it belonged to them, how do you think that would play out? How do you think we would avoid that?
Your concept is a little bit different from what everybody else talking about debris has been thinking about. We don't care what it is. We just want to get it out of low Earth orbit. So I would tell you to follow your dream, design this system first, and then let us argue about it once you get it. You're probably not going to bring it back to Earth in the first place. That's not what you're going to do. You're going to go out and collect it, and you're going to do one of two things. Either you're going to put it in a big container and you're going to boost it to an orbit where it'll stay for 100 years or something like that, or more ideally, you're going to deorbit it into a destructive reentry where it's going to burn up on its way back in, and so nobody will ever see it, so you won't have to worry about who it belongs to.
It's a lot easier than what I was thinking.
You're not gonna, no, seriously, you're neither gonna spend the time nor the money to try to build an orbital debris removal spacecraft that's gonna have the capability of doing an intact reentry. That's a waste of money. And you just wanna get something that collects all that stuff and then lets it burn up during reentry.
Yeah, there will be no junkyard.
No,
in the future.
unfortunately, not
It'll be
that.
vaporized.
Yeah.
So, Anthony, thank you for your question.
Thank you very much, Anthony.
Next, please.
Gentlemen, thanks for your time tonight. My name is Andrew Bates, and this is a question about collaboration. I know you touched on that a little bit. You mentioned about the global exploration roadmap and the decadal survey that happens every 10 years. What are some of the other items that are in play to keep the world collaborated on space exploration? And where does the United States see itself in making improvements?
The field of science and aeronautics are far more lucrative, if you will, in terms of building international collaboration than human spaceflight. Human spaceflight, even today, is going to be limited to a very small, relatively small number of nations. When you look at science and aeronautics, every country has airlines, almost every country. And so, you know, NASA heads an organization now called IFAR, the International Federation for Aeronautics Research. And China is an active member of that when you talk about getting countries to come together. And NASA has international agreements with most of the nations on what we call air traffic management. So it's trying to help them do the same kind of thing that we're doing and to smooth the flow of traffic, to get rid of the congestion, to build systems that are eco-friendly and the like. So that's an area. And it's bringing a lot of people together that wouldn't come together otherwise. Science is space science, astronomy, astrophysics. Those are other areas that any nation in the world that wants to support their kids going to school and studying, they can play a role. They can potentially they can have a Nobel Prize winner. There's no rule that says, you can't have a Nobel Prize winner from Niger. It's unlikely just because of their educational system, but there's no rule that says you can't do that if you can inspire kids to get interested and do great things.
I would say there's three things that bind collaboration. And this is just from my experience, we all breathe the same air. We all drink the same water. And we all share the common heritage of the same night sky. Those are really powerful for me. I think if we double down on those three areas, we won't have any trouble getting along.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Lynn McCall, and I'm just a guy who likes space and NASA.
So are we.
Now, that being said, I do have one disagreement. I think that the lunar module was something that really was kind of, really broke paradigms, because no clue how to do something like that. Back to the previous question about space junk. And you talk about more and more countries are going into space. And it's almost to the point where, you can piggyback stuff on the back of aircraft.
Everything.
So you can really put massive amounts of stuff up there.
You can put a Tesla in interplanetary space, right?
Something the size of a quarter can really be detrimental to almost any space vehicle. So I'm just curious as to what the plan is in the space community, where they're going with it.
There are international standards, and the difference between, this is the challenge, they're standards, there are no laws. We talked about laws earlier, but laws may catch up, I'm not sure. Most nations follow international standards for debris mitigation and debris prevention. So today, if a nation decides that they want to launch something, then by convention, they're supposed to provide enough fuel to either boost it to a parking orbit where it'll be, out of the way of things for hundreds of years, or enough fuel to deorbit it at the end of its normal mission into a destructive deorbit, if it's not going to come back and land somewhere. And most nations abide by that. The challenge today is CubeSats. And so you're seeing, probably here at Ohio State, you're seeing just a burst of research, actually R&D on building micro rockets or micro thrusters that'll fit on a CubeSat that's not much bigger than this cup, or solar arrays or different things that can make this little satellite controllable so that you can deorbit it or park it or do something. So that's when you're putting thousands of them out at a time, that clutters up your orbit pretty quick.
Yeah, so those spacecraft should be built with means by which they can be deorbited. 'Cause space junk is something that you're much better off not creating in the first place than having to go clean up. Now, in sufficiently low orbits, that debris will come back in. And so at some level, wait, and then it will sort of clean itself up. But at these orbits higher than the space station, 400, 600, 800 kilometers, where there isn't a lot of drag, that stuff just does not come down. And so you don't want to create it in the first place. And responsible behavior in space, not conducting anti-satellite tests in orbit, those kinds of things will go a long way. But we've got some work to do to clean up the space environment.
What about cutting down on like explosive rockets that are used for, say, deploying things? Because you don't realize it, but a lot of times that launches out small debris, and that small debris can be really detrimental. So, something, I'm just wondering if there are any kind of standards on that. Is anybody heading that way, or
everybody talks about it? The reason I talked about the need for game-changing propulsion, like, even we didn't talk about nuclear propulsion yet, but something like whether it's thermonuclear, but nuclear propulsion, ion propulsion, things that don't use chemicals that leave debris as a residue coming out of an engine, I think might be helpful. So, but I don't know.
This is also thank you for the question. It's also an important reason why, in my opinion, the United States needs to fully engage with organizations such as the UN Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space in Vienna. You say, well, great, you get to go to Vienna. And Vienna's nice, by the way. You'll go there as the first woman to go to Mars. You'll go there. But it's more than just, nice food and the waltz. That's where the world comes together to talk about these kinds of issues, to try to establish some kind of global common framework in which we can work without giving up. You don't necessarily go there to sort of forfeit your own national interests and your own sovereignty. That's not the point. It's a forum for dialogue so that we can start to peel the layers off of the onion on these kinds of thorny issues and others. And that body works really well. I think Chiaki Mukai, she flew with you, right?
She didn't fly with me,
she flew with Jan Davis on. Okay, Jan Davis flew with you. So this is the Kevin Bacon number of who flew with who and what's the connectivity. She is a former Japanese astronaut who runs that and does a fantastic job. And these are the kinds of places where I hope our students, even if you decide engineering is your future, great. Understand the policy context in which you're operating. Understand the global environment, because you don't work in a vacuum. Money doesn't just come out of the sky and you spend it on cool things you thought of that night. And if policy and frameworks and discussion and collaboration is your thing, and you want to do it in space, learn something about the technical aspects of what you're working on. You will be so much more effective. And that's the power of these kinds of dialogues that we have through the John Glenn College and through this series of programs. We bring together the content and the context, regardless of whether you describe yourself as content or context. Content for one, content for the other. How do we bring that together to create a conversation like we have had this evening, so that we can at least, if not make progress, at least grow in our understanding of each other? So, unfortunately, I think we are out of time. And as a boy growing up in St. Louis, I will use my moderator's prerogative. I used to listen to the voice of a very famous Ohio State graduate who would broadcast the St. Louis Cardinal baseball games on KMOX radio. His name was Jack Buck. His son is some guy that you probably see watching the NFL or something like that. And he would always conclude with these words: "Thanks for your time, this time, until next time, so long." So I want to thank you for being here tonight. We hope to see you again soon. And we look forward to any future questions you might have as we gather and exit tonight. Thank you very much.
Good job.